So IGN has come out with what I would label a scathing report. They've come out with this report on the difficult working conditions and, frankly, problematic company culture for animators on Inside Out 2 at Pixar. This is insane. It's a very long report. I highly recommend checking it out because there's a lot of details. I basically cover everything, but there's a lot of texture that I couldn't include here. So workers cite, among other things, long and unsustainable work hours, partially in an attempt to downplay any queer undertones with Riley in the film. And I'll kind of get into some of the details of all those claims. And IGN, for this report, spoke to 10 former employees under the condition of anonymity. So what's the context for this? So I talked about it on this channel before. I have a video actually all about this, about Pixar's new kind of strategy for their movies, which you can find on the channel. But in short, the context here is that Pixar has been struggling, right, for the past couple of years, both critically and commercially. Has not really struck the same kind of financial success or cultural zeitgeist that it did in the 2000s. It did a little bit in the 2010s, but I would say, forgetting which ones I prefer over others, I would say the only real culturally resonant Pixar film of the 2010s was Inside Out and Coco. Even though I love Monsters University, that I would not say is culturally super resonant. And they've really been struggling since the pandemic, right? All their films are getting sent to Disney Plus. I actually liked quite a bit of those. Turning Red's one of my favorite Pixar movies now. But when they finally returned to theaters in 2022 with Lightyear, which was this weird kind of spin-off of Toy Story, but it had none of the same tonal qualities, and it just wasn't very good in a vacuum anyway. Unsurprisingly, it was a big financial and critical disappointment. And IGN notes that due to the way Pixar and Disney split the profits, for a film to be considered profitable for Pixar, it would have to cross $600 million worldwide. And now let me do quickly, if I was really prepared, I would have already pulled this up. But I'm going to look up Lightyear's total worldwide box office return was only $226 million. Obviously, they were still kind of in the thick of the pandemic. We're kind of right near the end of it. But still, that's way below $600 million. And, Pixar really is shooting for $1 billion. That's their idea of a hit. So Inside Out 2 not only needed to be a hit, it needed to be a huge hit. So much was riding on this film, again, both critically and commercially. So IGN notes that most, if not all, Pixar employees worked on the film in some capacity. And noted that the credits for Inside Out 2 are longer than any past Pixar film. Just in terms of the sheer number of names. It was seen the production of Inside Out 2 was seen as an all hands on deck emergency. Multiple sources have said that Pete Docter, who wrote and directed the first film, quietly took on more responsibilities beyond his initial executive producer role. Kind of stepping in this is too important to leave this to a first time director, who is the official credited director, Kelsey Mann, I think, right? Kelsey Mann. Yeah, Kelsey Mann. And one of the anonymous sources that IGN spoke to said, quote, "We need this movie to succeed because we won't have a studio otherwise." And that is the pressure that everybody felt the whole time. Even now, I think people are gone, still feeling that pressure of oh my God, we did it, end quote. So there's this idea that, because I think typically the way companies like Pixar work is that not everyone works on every film, right? You might have some people doing some double dipping. It depends on the needs. So this was a rare instance where basically everyone who worked at Pixar between in a certain period of years worked on this film in some capacity. In order to get that done, this led to massive crunch. So if you don't know what crunch is, crunch is when workers, typically tech workers, particularly when it comes to animation or game development, really intensive computer science work. Crunch is when these workers work long hours with little or no days off. So, 15-hour days, 7 days a week or something like that, right? Usually this is not forced on employees, but either the company culture implicitly demands it, or they are explicitly told you know, if you don't do this, there's, you probably won't be fired, but people will probably think like they want us. There's a fear of seeming like you're not a team player. If everyone else is giving into the pressure to do that, you'll seem like the asshole if you're not also doing that, right? One of the sources IGN spoke to said, quote, "I think for a month or two, the animators were working 7 days a week, ridiculous amounts of production workers, just being tossed into jobs they never really done before. It was horrendous," end quote. So not only are you spending all this time, but for some people, this was stuff, they were given tasks that it was their first time doing that task or something, right? So you would think, okay, there's so much crunch. We have so much to do, so little time. You would think maybe the solution is let's hire some more people so we can kind of, not have our current staff stretched super thin. That would be the smart thing to do. Pixar did the opposite. So in May, so about a month before Inside Out 2 came out, there was a massive layoff, right? About 14% of the staff was laid off, which of course led to even more crunch because everyone else had to now pick up the slack. Another source IGN spoke to said, quote, "The internal culture of Pixar right now is really rough. There's just an incredible amount of people who are like, I can't do this anymore," end quote. And again, that speaks to a larger issue of Pixar's company culture, which is very focused on the vanguard or the veterans, right? Like those original kind of founding fathers, if you will. So, you have your John Lasters, who of course is now disgraced for sexual harassment issues, Pete Docter, who's still around, Andrew Stanton, Brad Bird to a degree. You have these like original founding fathers, so to speak. But there was a brief period where the company was willing to bring on different kinds of filmmakers, especially again during the pandemic. And not only were you having directors like this might be their first time helming a film, like they maybe have worked as an assistant director, just as an animator. Now, not only do you have people who are greener, but typically this also was a more diverse group, right? So Domi Shi, who directed Turning Red, of course, that was her first feature directorial film. She had, of course, directed the short Bao, like the one about the mom and her children are little dumplings. But, an Asian woman getting to direct her first feature film. It's a major Pixar film, right? So there was this brief moment where they were a little bit more willing to kind of give the keys of the kingdom over to, non-traditional routes, aka meaning marginalized communities that have been shut out of the industry, right? But unfortunately, due to middling results, whether it wasn't received well by critics or it didn't do financially well, this kind of, I think, spooked Disney and Pixar, and it reinforced a creative conservatism and a personnel conservatism, right? Again, people have noted that for the longest time until he was unceremoniously ousted, the company, there was this real almost like worship of John Lasseter, again, as like this almost like George Washington, Walt Disney-esque figure. Now that he's gone, it's kind of, despite Pete Docter not being at the same level, the culture had been built around hero worship. So then Pete Docter kind of got slotted into that. And it's something that, one of the sources that IGN spoke to noted, which I thought was really interesting, is an over-reliance on veteran talent creates this bottleneck, right? Where everything has to go through them, and you're not able to kind of spread the creative work around. And that, of course, creates more logistical problems and work-life balance problems and crunch problems. Sources identified a new workflow that Pixar had adopted called quote-unquote long and lean. In theory, the idea is that films would have a longer development and production with a smaller team. So in theory, this gives films more time to cook, right? It gives the filmmakers more time to get the story right. In reality, all it did was give creatives, and usually those creatives were again these veteran founding fathers, disproportionate amount of time to tinker with the film, leaving the animators to pick up the slack and rush to complete the film in time. So if I just ended the story there, that's already a problem. But then on top of this, this wasn't the sole source of the crunch, but one of the sources for the crunch were these major concerns over the potential queerness of the character Riley, right? So if you've seen the film follows Riley. She's a little bit older now, and she has this kind of idolizing of one of the older girls on the hockey team. And many people were, as soon as the trailer came out, people went, "Oh, she's gay." Like, this movie's gonna be about her realizing she's gay. But that was not what Disney wanted to try to do. So Disney leadership put most of the blame on Lightyear's failure on its inclusion of a lesbian couple. This got a lot of attention, mostly from people on the right, not only complaining that it was going to be there, but then once the film didn't do well, kind of going like, "Aha, see, go woke, go broke, and your film sucks, and it's because you included lesbians in it." Though it wasn't even really that big of a part of the film. It really only was highlighted in a brief same-sex kiss. And supposedly, the scene that kiss was reportedly removed, and then due to the staff uproar, it was then reinstated. This reading by Disney leadership that, oh, that's why the film didn't do well, because the conservatives, there was a backlash, seems to disregard the film's overall mediocrity. And one of the sources says as much, that IGN spoke to, saying, quote, "It is, as far as I know, still a thing where leadership, they'll bring up Lightyear specifically and say, oh, Lightyear was a financial failure because it had a queer kiss in it. That's not the reason the movie failed," end quote. And if you've seen the film, it's a mediocre, fine movie, but it's nothing special. And I think maybe that's the reason why it didn't do well, because it didn't have anything really of worth to offer audiences, right? And due to all of this financial failure, and then also you had, again, was it last year's Pixar film Elemental, which, despite having really strong box office momentum week to week, did not open very big, and overall did not have a huge box office return. Also directed by an Asian woman. Oh, actually, no, it was not directed by an Asian woman. The main character was voiced by an Asian woman, but the director, I think, was the director of Onward and Monsters University and things like that. But basically what Pixar was signaling was, and Disney as a whole, the company said going forward they focus on more quote-unquote universal stories, right? Which, again, is a euphemism for culturally homogenous stories, i.e. white, heterosexual, American stories and characters, right? Because most good writers know that universality is found in specificity, right? If you just have this kind of like vagueness about your world and its characters, no one really connects to it. But people seeing really specific cultural representations, even if that is not their cultural background, they relate because they can find the universal in the specific, right? So again, this is not really about universal stories. It's about just having stories that are going to be more palatable to the conservative audience that Disney feels, didn't show up for Lightyear, and that was the reason somehow that movie failed. So tying this back to Inside Out 2, throughout the production process, there were constant notes on this film to make Riley, quote-unquote, less gay. IGN notes that this led to numerous edits and revisions following the writer's strike, concluding back in September of 2023. And again, effort was made to make the relationship between Riley and Val, who's the girl, she's older, she has a pink neon stripe in her hair, this very clearly gay, kind of fascination Riley has with Val. Wanting to make it as platonic as possible. Going as far to, make sure there would be changes in the lighting of a scene or the tone of certain scenes. Disney wanted to make sure that there was no hint of any queerness whatsoever. And one of the sources for IGN describes this as, quote, just doing a lot of extra work to make sure that no one would potentially see them as not straight, end quote. So you already have all of this crunch, and at least you could go, well, at least this crunch, no crunch is acceptable or justifiable, but you could maybe go, well, yeah, but we're doing it to make the movie better. But if you're if you can't go home and see your family, you're working 15 hours a day, 6-7 days a week, And it's so that people don't misinterpret these two prepubescent girls or pubescent girls of being gay. That feels like, as a worker, you're like, I feel like my time is not being valued, right? And one of the sources for IGN said, quote, a lot of us accepted the fact that we may never see a major gay character in a Pixar movie, right? Disney, over the past decade or so, has been very pleased with themselves of including gay characters, but they're usually blink and you miss it, right? So the big one, was LeFou in the live-action Beauty and the Beast. Like, oh, he's gonna be the first gay Disney character. How exciting! And then you see it, and there's just like this one part where he just like happens to dance with a man for about 2 seconds. There's similar things like in Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, there was a same-sex kiss at the end when they're celebrating. In Finding Dory, I think there's like a gay couple. I see Viviana commenting in the comments, there's a queer couple featured in Onward and potentially Finding Dory, so maybe Disney isn't just ready to have a queer main character. But I read the movie as Riley being gay or at least bi. Exactly, right? There are all these examples, but I'm about to blow some of your minds. The reason why all these moments are blink and you miss it is so you could then cut that shot out when you release it in homophobic countries, especially like in the Middle East or China, right? They will never commit, at least with this leadership or the immediate future, they will never commit to having a gay character or any kind of gay elements at a level where it's interwoven, where you can't just like cut out a 2-second part of it for international audiences, right? But people have always projected queerness onto Disney characters, especially because a lot of people in the queer community really love Disney. I remember for the longest time the big one was make Elsa gay, which I wasn't necessarily a supporter of, not because I didn't want her to be gay, but I just thought she worked better as, maybe make her asexual. Like, I thought she worked better without any love interest of any kind, regardless of gender. But you can see this urge or yearning for this. But because Disney got spooked, because they don't want to admit that their film just sucked, they're like, oh, well, it was because there was a same-sex kiss in it. So all of this led to a production process that one source called a quote-unquote shit show. And it's interesting because then Inside Out 2 was, of course, wildly successful. It was like the biggest opening of this year. It's the biggest grossing film of the year. It's the highest grossing animated film of all time now. So does the film's success reinforce these problematic corporate instincts, right? Are they going to look at this and go, oh, okay, so everything we did was good. We should crunch our employees. We should lean on our veterans. And we should downplay any queerness. And again, like I've said time and time again, corporations and the entertainment industry always take the wrong lessons from success and failure. And one of the sources IGN spoke to said, quote, they learned nothing. And that's the feedback I'm still getting when I'm reaching out to current employees. Right now, everyone's on Elio. Elio is like their next film that they're doing. Things are exactly the same how they were before. Everybody's working crazy hours to get Elio fixed, end quote. So overall, this reflects poorly on Disney. Pixar as well. But ultimately, the buck stops with Disney and Bob Iger. Disney, on the whole, claims to be this progressive company, but, not treating its workers very well. Poor working conditions. Notably, Pixar animators are not unionized. These unfair layoffs, so many laid off workers who crunched were laid off before the film came out, and then they found out that they wouldn't be getting their bonuses that are tied to the film's mammoth success. One source said, quote, to be told by our HR reps that we were not going to qualify for that bonus felt like an ultimate fuck you from Disney, end quote. I didn't know this, but reading this story, the bonuses at Pixar are really crucial because apparently the salaries for workers at Pixar's Emeryville location, which I think is like outside of San Francisco, like it's a little bit outside, or maybe it's outside of LA. The salaries for that location are kind of low for the area, so you kind of count on that bonus. So it doesn't really seem to care about its workers. And one source put it really well, quote, Disney invested $1.5 billion in Fortnite. 1% of that $1.5 billion would have saved all of our jobs, end quote. So Disney tried to pretend that they're this progressive company, but they don't treat their workers very well. On top of they're active, it's not just we're avoiding it. They're actively trying. They've spent time and money trying to downplay and dampen any expression of queerness in this film. Ultimately, they're a corporation first, and corporations are gonna let you down. And when people go like, "I'm so disappointed in Disney," I'm not disappointed. It's disappointing for our society, but I'm not disappointed because I held them to some standard. Because ultimately they're a corporation, they care more about money than values. And there was an article from The Independent by Louis Chilton titled, quote, "Pixar's Inside Out 2 was a slap in the face for LGBT plus Disney fans," end quote. Again, it's like you have this community. It reminds me of the whole Don't Say Gay fiasco in Florida with the former CEO Bob Chapek kind of like not sure should he speak out, and then when he did, it wasn't very forceful, so he made no one happy. It's like you have this community that literally goes to the ends of the earth for you. Buying all your merch, going to see all your movies, going to Disney World so often. People make fun of Disney adults, because they're kind of cringy. But, a lot of Disney adults are a part of the LGBTQ community, right? Like, this is a huge constituency. So it just feels like they just don't care, right? They will care if it's beneficial for them, but they will not care if it's dumb. And one of the sources for IGN kind of put it really interestingly, saying, quote, "I think the biggest feeling that I heard around the studio before the layoffs and now even post layoffs, talking to people who are still there, is everybody feels like the executives are really just acting in a fear-based way. Everything is to preserve their own power in their own jobs. So I think morale is really low because people no longer trust that they're being led with their best interests at heart," end quote. Again, it's a dog-eat-dog world, but it doesn't have to be that way, or at least it shouldn't have to be that way.